All right, hello and welcome all of you free code camp coders out there. My name is Rob. I'm with freeCodeCamp, where we try to help you understand some of the free code camp modules and coming at it from an instructor point of view. And this is just one part of our series that we've been going through, trying to create this quiz or this web page here. And this is the very first step that we're seeing here is the preview, but we are on step number 31. So if this is the video where you're looking to learn a few things as we're going through each one of the steps, then keep on watching. And as always, down below, we have everything all chaptered out for you to jump to the specific step that you might need help on. But we're going to go through the next 10 in this video and may cover some new topics and talk about a few things that we may not have talked about before. So join us on the journey. This is my first time going through this thing here as well, but we'll go through it together. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So we're on step number 31, and I do want to say I really do appreciate all of the comments, all the likes that we do get on any of our videos. We read every single comment and respond to them as well. So feel free to comment on this video on any kind of questions that you might have, and then make sure that you hit that like button for us because it really helps us out with that YouTube algorithm. But on step number 31, it says, although it's not required, that the label elements within a nested input do not require the for attribute. And that's very true, meaning like this works out really well, meaning that we don't have to direct link it to the input when we are wrapping a label around the input. It's almost, I always say, maybe it's like a hot dog bun here, and here is the hot dog. As long as it's inside of the hot dog bun, the label, it knows that it is part of this input field. But it says here for best practices, go ahead and utilize the for attribute on the label. And that's where we type that keyword for, and then we're going to set that equal here to the ID that it belongs to for the input field. So that's what it's wanting us to do for each one of these labels here. And we're going to continue on going through each one of these labels and putting it in there. And then I'll go ahead and pause the video, and then I will bring us back up to speed once I have it all done so you can see what that actually looks like. Okay, so this is what I did here. And again, we're just matching things up here. The keyword for, and then we have that Q1A2, and that is linking up to this one right here. The next one that we had is this one down here, part of the answered list. And notice that we have a Q2A1 here and a Q2A1 here. That is how we are linking these with the for. All right. So now let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next step. So step number 32, it says give the label elements text such as the input comes before the text, and make sure that we give the input elements a value matching the text. The text should either be true or false. And this is what it's wanting us to do here. So we're going to come in after the input field, and I'm just going to hit the enter key here, and I'm going to put true. Okay. So you can see that now we have that little radio button, and then we have the text right after it. Now, we want to continue on doing this, but I do want to show you one good example, and then we are going to repeat this process for the rest of them. And it wants us to put a value in here to match what was down here, okay? And we're just going to put true for that one. Now, I don't know if it's specifically looking for a capital T for here, if it's going to be that nitpicky, we'll see. But we're going to continue on doing this for the rest of them. And so if this label was true, then we're going to come down here and do another one. We're going to make this one false. And then we're going to come up here and give this a value of false. All right. So we're going to continue that process for the other two. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and then I'll show you what those look like as well. Okay, so I went to the second set of questions, and just notice that I did do the same exact thing. The value is true for the input, and then we also have value false, but then we also added that label part, which is false, and the label part that was true. So those are the only things that I added while I paused the video. Let's go ahead and check our work to see if indeed did we match the test needs. There we go. Congratulations. We're moving on to the next step. So step number 33 says that if you click on the radio buttons, you might notice that both inputs within the same true false field set can be selected at the same time. And what it's talking about here is if I click on true and I'm like, let me change my mind, I need that to be false, they are both being selected. And that's an unwanted response. And how do we group these? And the way to get around this is we need to supply an attribute on the input field by supplying the name. And it didn't give us any type of thing on here that it wants us to do. as far as what do we want to name it. So I'm just going to call this one for question 1. I'm going to name it Q1. Next one over here, we'll do a name here and we'll make that Q1 as well. So as long as they are named the exact same, we will be telling the HTML saying, hey, if the true one is clicked, that's going to go in the Q1 slot. If I click false, that also is going to go in the Q1 slot and it will take its place. And now we see the behavior that we are wanting. And of course, we haven't fixed this one down here, but that's going to be the exact same process. We're going to come down here, we'll do a name. Now we don't want it to be Q1. Otherwise, if we did, it would rotate between the 3. You can see that right there. But we want this to be Q2 if we're following our naming convention here. And I'll just put a Q2. And now these are separate and this is separate. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and check our work here. And there we go. Congratulations. We're moving on to the next step here. Step number 34. So to prevent unnecessary repetition, we can utilize the before pseudo class on our H3s, and we can supply it with the property of content and then supply the value of question pound, right? And so what it is going to have us do here is we see right here, we have a 1, we have a 2, but these are all H3 elements, and we are going to target the pseudo class before on the H3s. So that way we can inject some content before the H3 even starts to write that 1 on the screen. And utilizing the pseudo class, it does not do anything to your HTML page whatsoever. It doesn't do anything to the JavaScript whatsoever. It's just going to think of it as it's scanning the page, it's building it out. And when it comes to an H3 element, we're going to be putting in there the question and then the hashtag. Okay. So let me go ahead and put that code in here and let's take a look at what it did to the HTML. So there we go. You can see that now we have question and then the hashtag, and then it automatically put in the 1 and the 2 from the HTML that we already had. So this is the syntax for this. We want to first target the element, which is the H3, and then we put these 2 colons on here to signify, hey, we're going to be adding a pseudo class to this. And there's lots of pseudo classes out there. I encourage you to look at that on W3 Schools. In this case here, we're utilizing the before, and then we're supplying some content here, and that prevents us from having to type repetitive data, repetitiveness throughout the HTML file that can be done in the CSS. So anyways, let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations, it passes. All right. And before I do go on here, I do want to point this out also, that if we are looking at this from an SEO point of view, that typically things like Google, like Yahoo, they are not going to be able to read the CSS generated content on there. That's mainly for humans to visually see it. So again, it might help us out code-wise, but may not be as beneficial if you are hoping that the crawlers would come out there and grab this part here, which is the question number 1, right? They would just see what we did before without it on there. So that's what the web crawlers would see, and this is what the humans would see. Okay, just want to make sure that is there for you as a difference. All right, so step number 35, it says the final section of this quiz needs to contain a drop-down and a text box. So begin nesting a div with the class of form row. So let's do a div. Again, open and closing them before I'm adding the class, because as I've said in the previous videos, and I see this all the time with students, is they forget to put the closing tag on there. You can see I have a closing tag on there on the far right, which is the /div. Now, as far as the class name, it says it wants it to be form row. And then it says nest 4 divs inside of that, alternating their classes with question block. And so what it is wanting us to do here, it says 4 divs. So let's do that. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that and paste that 4 times. And then we want to have a class here called question block. And then this one here is going to be of the class of answer. And we're going to want to rotate this with the alternating of these items here. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video to complete this. All right, so that is what I ended up doing here. Again, just following that pattern, question block, answer, question block, answer. Let's go ahead and check our code. It doesn't want anything else, I believe, from the description. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next part here. So now we're in step number 36. It says that within the div question block, which is this one right here, as well as the other one, it says nest 1 label element, add the CSS related question to the label text. Real simple, we'll do a label. And again, we're just closing it off here. And let me put in my slash. Okay, so inside here, this is where we can ask that question. We can just say, do you like CSS? And for simplicity, because I know they're going to change the question on me, I don't get to keep it. I'm just going to paste the same thing there, and it's going to be the same question twice. All right, let's go ahead and check our answer here. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next step. Okay, so we're on step number 37 on here. This is where we're going to be tackling this part here. It says within the div answer element, which is right exactly where my cursor is flashing here. It says we want to make sure that we create a drop-down list, which is the select tag, and it needs to have 3 elements on there. And it says give the first option the value of nothing, and then the second option with the value of yes, with the corresponding text to say yes, and then likewise for the no. Okay, so what is it talking about that we need to go ahead and do and perform on this? And so one of the things that I would always suggest doing, and to maybe get some refresher, is let's go to Google and let's search out the select HTML tag. All right, so this is the W3 Schools definition for the HTML tag. It provides us with a nice little example. And this is what I'm talking about here, is if you don't know, if you need a quick refresher, maybe you need some examples to kind of look at while we're getting started with all this. The select one is something that you may not use as often as you might think, or you just need a real quick, hey, what does this look like? W3 Schools is really great for an example code. So you can see here that we have a label, and we already had the label up on ours. It's right above the window. I'll go ahead and show that here after we get done with this page. But the part that we care about here is the select tag that we see right here. There's the opening part, there's the closing part, and then in between here, we have the options. And the things that you want to take note of is the select tag is what creates the drop-down list, and then these options are what we're going to see in the actual drop-down menu. So you can see here, when I clicked the try this yourself, it showed up with this. And now we see the Volvo, the Saab, the Opel, and the Audi, right? And so you can see that where it is drawing the text values here is what's in between the tags. And as far as the value itself, that's what the form, when we actually submit it and we want to do something with the data that we collect from the form, that's what goes in here. And notice that it's all lowercase. And later on, I'm sure in these modules, you'll be able to see what the submit data actually looks like when we're submitting a form. So anyways, I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention while we're watching this video, and that we're going to go ahead and do that same type of methodology, which is we're going to create that select element. So let's do that first. We're going to do select. And again, we're just going to do open and closing tags. Now, it didn't tell us at all that we needed to put any kind of attributes inside here, because if we look at the W3 Schools, it does have something in here called the name. And then we also have the ID that is up here as well that may play a role in future little modules here, different steps that freeCodeCamp gives us. So inside the select, it says it wants us to have 3 of the options. So I'm going to do option, and then I'm going to close it off. Okay. The next one here, I'm going to simply just copy and paste because it said it needs us to have 3 of these. So I'm just going through this step by step of what the instructions said. Now, the first element option needs to have a value of nothing. So I'm just going to do value, and I'm going to set that to nothing. Next, it says the text that goes in between the option should be select an option. So let me go ahead and put that in there. Okay, so if we look at this down here, we now have our drop-down menu with select an option, but we don't have any other options to choose from down here besides the blank ones that we created. Now, it says for this one here, it wants us to have yes in there with a capital Y. And as far as the value goes, it wants us to have the lowercase yes. And then we're going to do the same exact thing for the no. I'm going to do value. I'm going to set that equal to O, which is all lowercase. Up here, I'm going to uppercase the first N and then lowercase the remaining letter. Okay, let's go ahead and check our work, making sure that it's exactly what we needed. It says no. It says you should give the select a required. I did not see that on here, but we do need to put that on here. So we're going to put required in the text here. And maybe it did say it and I just didn't pick up on it. So anyways, let's go ahead and check our code. Now it passes and we're ready to move on to the next step here. All right, so before I hit the submit button on that, I did see that it said give one required select element. So it did tell us to do that in this statement, but it was hidden very carefully. We're on step number 38 right now, building a quiz web page for freeCodeCamp. And it tells us on here, it says link the first label element to the select element and give it the name attribute on here. And again, I am going to go back to W3 schools just real quick to point out a few things on here. Is if we go back to the W3 schools, and remember I told you in the previous step, hey, the select statement on here has a name, it also has an ID. Notice that the label also has the for attribute. And so this is what it is wanting us to do with the for attribute for the label. This is what links it for the accessibility. And then as far as the ID, notice that the for is linked to the ID, and that's what allows it to be accessibility-wise linked. And then it wants us to apply a name to this. And this is going to be something that is used on the form submission when you get the data, because in this example here, it will have the form submission will say, hey, the cars that were selected happen to be an Audi. Okay. So that is how the data would show up. It would show up with cars, and then it would show up with Audi if they did select the Audi. Okay. So that is what it's for. And then down here, we have the little descriptions down here. It says the ID attribute is needed to associate the drop-down list with the label. And then it says it's always good to add a label tag for accessibility practices. That's what we want to make sure that we want to do. And then the name attribute is needed to reference the data once the form has been submitted. And it says if you do omit the name attribute, no data from the drop-down menu will be submitted. So again, that is another key in the process of making sure that your forms do have a name so that when they are submitted, you're able to grab that data that they did select. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to our quiz prompt here. And it says link the first label element with the select element and give the select element a name attribute as well. And so it didn't really give us much to work with as far as what do we want to put inside here. Let's go ahead and come up with one right here. So let's go ahead and do for, and we'll just give it a generic one here. We'll just call it selector. And then we're going to come down here to the select, and we're going to make sure that the name here, this is for the form submission. It can be a selector as well. And then the ID will make that selector also. Now, the key to this again, guys, is the for that we see right here. It has to match up with the ID. That's what it is looking for. We could call this thing anything. We could call it pool party, and it should still work just fine because the linkage happens with the for and the ID, not the for and the name. Again, the name, again, we saw it in W3 schools that this is for the data submission. If we did not have a name on here, we would not know what they selected. It would not be included in the data. So we want to give it a name that we recognize in order to put that in the database, for example. Okay, let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next one here. So step number 39 on here for the build a quiz web page, it tells us that we want to nest one text area element within the div answer element that we have highlighted right here. Okay. And we also need to set the number of rows and columns that it has. And this is where we're going to have to dig into our memory a little bit if we want, or of course we can always go to W3 schools on what does this element look like. And for some reason, and I don't know, maybe somebody else can explain this in the comments, is why is a text area element, why does it have open and close elements when like input elements do not? That's always interesting because I never see anything typed in the middle of the text area here. So that will give us a text area. Now it says it wants us to add the number of rows and columns it has. Now it doesn't give us anything as far as like answers go, what should go inside here. And so we'll just do rows here, and we're going to set that equal to, we'll do 5. And then for the columns, we'll do 45 and see what that gives us here. The thing that we're going to look at when we are evaluating this is we can see that, hey, we now have 5 rows going down. And then this text area here got wider with the columns, because if I were to simply remove the 5 and only do 4, we'll see that it does in fact shrink down here. But we'll go ahead and make that 45. Again, it doesn't tell us what we want to have inside these, and columns does get shortened down to calls, C-O-L-S, instead of columns. Let's check our code. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next step. And don't worry if freeCodeCamp removes our rows and columns because it didn't specify what it wanted as far as the values go. All right, moving on to the next step. Step number 40, and here you can see that they already changed our rows and columns, just like I told you. And it wants us to link these two together by giving the label with a for attribute. And so I'm just going to do for. And then we can set this to anything we want, but we want to be consistent. If we're going to make this a for, and we'll do like text area. Then down here for the text area, we would want to have the ID set to text area as well. Now they don't give us anything as far as what should this be. And I'm not too concerned with it because once we check our code and hit the next button, it's going to supply the form, the ID that it wants us to have to begin with, but it wants us to go ahead and do this. And it also says give it the name attribute. And so we'll do name and we'll set that equal to the text area answer. Okay. All right. And let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next one here. So we made it through the next 10 steps. You made it through this video, congratulations. Again, if you have any questions or any kind of things that you were stuck on that this video helped out, make sure you let us know in the comments. That way we can make the next videos better and better as you're going through your journey. As always, thank you for liking, thank you for subscribing, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.